So far, as of recording, there have been 7 developer diaries for Imperator Rome, and I feel like now, we have enough information to start forming an idea of how this game will work. Going forward each month, I hope to gather up the developer diaries and list the new information because this is a game I'm just very interested in, and so far, I think it's looking great. Now, I'm not going to do it weekly because I feel like each diary on its own is just a bit small currently. So, without further delay, let's get through them. Diary 1, The Vision. The first developer diary focused on establishing the vision for Imperator Rome. Johan, the creative director, whom all developer diaries have been written by, says that, quote, "This is the first game we have made where a post from a forum member is quoted at the top of our game design," end quote. And that quote is from the user Leoniditsu, and it reads, quote, "The balance between CK2 and EU4 and Vic2 should remain in Rome 2. Rome was a fantastic mix between CK1's characters, EU3 for diplomacy and war, and Victoria 1 for parties, provinces system, and the population dynamic, and then it had its own features like barbaric migration and the best civil wars in Paradox games." So Johan elaborates that they wanted to stay true to this vision, taking elements of their other major franchises and making it better with an updated user experience and player agency while increasing depth and complexity. What they won't be going forward with is removing characters as envoys, stating that it was bad and people used it just to get rid of them. I kind of agree, and I think that generally speaking that sounds like a good change. They'll be changing omens and religious prestige. In EU Rome, omens act as a percentage chance of a good or bad outcome, and religious prestige was supposed to help that outcome and provide some other buffs. You could even diplomatically desecrate an enemy's holy site to hurt their prestige. Generally speaking, it didn't really play much of an effect and was a bit useless, and from looking it up online, it still seems to confuse the community on what it really does. The last aspect is that trade required a lot of micromanagement, and this will be reworked to make it more interesting and fun. Sounds good. That's really all for this developer diary, but this to me showcased that while they are taking elements of different games as their mantra, this game is really a sequel to EU Rome, as that's the constant reference point they've been using. Diary number 2, The Map. Johan kicks off by saying that, quote, "This is arguably the biggest and most detailed map we have made for a game ever. More is not always better though, as of which the original release of Hearts of Iron 3 is a great example. We've taken good care into making a game where you can have an interesting situations both while playing a small state and while playing a vast empire," end quote. Potential developer fluff aside, this is what you want to hear. Humble acknowledgement of something that maybe didn't quite work, and reassurance that they are catering to both small and large states. A problem I have as a recent EU player is that playing small can feel really boring and really hard. Now, I don't mind the difficulty, small states probably should be hard, but it feels like you've got nothing to do until you start getting big, at least in my experience. So I hope that this quote means that you've still got plenty to manage and do, even as some state that owns tiny amounts of land, and it seems that way because of how granular the provinces are. Johan points out that, taking Sicily as an example, in EU2 it had 2 provinces, in EU4 it had 3, in CK2 it had 5, and in Hearts of Iron 4 it had 9, but in Imperator it has 23, with 4 impassable areas. So you could imagine that Syracuse, quite a small player in the grand scheme of things, still has quite a few provinces to work with and manage. Now, they're not called provinces either. These highlighted areas are called cities, which hold a city, a village, or a town, which kind of makes the naming convention a bit weird. I feel like they should just be called regions within a province, but whatever. A province is now a group of these cities, usually about 10 to 12, and it's only considered a province if they all belong to the same country. This province is the entity that you then interact with to control trade and assign governors to. So this is interesting because it sounds like you need a full province in order to do that trade. Johan confirmed in the thread that Sicily has 2 provinces, east and west, and at a later screen we can see that it's split between 3 nations, and generally speaking, a lot of the map is fragmented by many nations. So I wonder, is trade extremely limited at first because essentially there isn't that many full provinces to trade from or with? Either way, we don't know how contested provinces work just yet, only that you can claim cities in peace talks if you wish. Diary number 3, The Resource System. Johan starts off by listing out the resources shown on the UI. Gold, which you gain from tax and trade, spend on development and military. Manpower, which is required to build and reinforce your armies. Johan skipped this one, but it looks like stability, which is basically the chance of rebellions and good or bad events, at least in previous games. And then we get into the more conceptual resources. Fans of Europa Universalis will know a lot about this, but essentially they are numbers that just tick up and allow you to do certain actions. They are all affected and based on your ruler at the time, so having a strong military leader will increase military power more per month. So you might want to look for leaders with certain capabilities depending on what you want to do in order to increase what you need at the time. We don't know how leaders are generated or chosen just yet, but in EU4, you basically just choose the stat you want when your leader dies. In EU Rome, government types did it in different ways, so expect a monarchy to be a succession so you'll know what's kind of coming next, and a republic to have a vote that you may be able to influence. This would place a greater emphasis on politics if it's going to affect your resources, but we'll have to wait until we know more to speculate how it's going to play. But let's go through them anyway. First is military power. You spend that on military traditions and abilities. Next is civic power. It's used to get inventions, trade routes, and move pops. Oratory power is used to fabricate claims, improving relations, laws, and endorsing parties. And religious power is used to give sacrifice, convert pops, and call omens. So these are the resources you build up and use on things. It's not really present in EU Rome, but it's basically a huge part of EU4. A lot of people take issue with the fact that these numbers are really gamey, because you essentially just need these points to do anything, and they can be a little bit random in how you get them because of events and the types of leaders you get. Now we can see in the screenshot certain events are influencing it. Some perhaps random, some with a bit of choice. They feel a lot less practical than gold and manpower, and I generally agree. I'm a big Stellaris fan, and I feel like every resource in that game feels just a lot more practical. Influence is probably the most abstract, but with everything else, diplomacy, war, characters, etc., you're not really limited by any resource to make decisions, and you can scale up each resource at will. Whereas in EU4, these kind of monarch resources are essential and have a very slow build to do the things you need. I find myself staring at those resources a lot in EU4, so I hope that this is somehow rectified in Imperator Rome. The only way to do that, I feel, will be to give you more options on how it's earned. Diary number 4, unit types. This one was a relatively short dev diary just about the different unit types you can expect to see and a little bit about how they fight. Until we know more about combat, this really doesn't amount to much just yet. There's a total of 9 unit types in Imperator Rome. I won't go through each one, they work as predicted, but interestingly, some unit types require a resource. Infantry requires iron, cavalry requires horses, and you can kind of guess the rest. Chariots require a Celtic and Mauryan tradition to recruit, which is also a bit different. What I found interesting was that Johan says that some units prefer being on the flanks, which might indicate that you have the option of where to place them and test out different tactics. Similarly, heavy infantry are required to do a city assault. Now, until we know more about combat, it's really anybody's guess, but it sounds to me that you may have to form army formations, or you can form army formations or stances, perhaps at the click of a button to play to that army's strength, maybe being defensive, maybe being aggressive, or something to that effect. We'll have to see. It's also a nice side note that modders can easily make as many unit types as they like. Excellent. Diary number 5, population. Population is divided into units, or pops. Pops have their own religion, culture, and happiness. Happiness affects their productivity and unrest, so it's kind of like Stellaris. There are 4 types of pops. Citizens provide research and commerce income. They represent the patricians or the nobles. Freemen then provide manpower. They represent the plebs and the common folk. Tribesmen provide a small amount of manpower and tax. They represent barbarians and uncivilized peoples. And slaves then also provide tax. So you can't have less than 1 pop in a city. The growth or decline is influenced by terrain, civilization value, amounts of pops, and access to trade. You can also gain pops through warfare. Sacking cities will transfer pops to your main capital and province capitals as slaves. So currently, to convert a pop from a slave to a freeman, or a tribesman to a freeman, it costs 10 religious power, and a freeman to citizen costs 10 oratory power. You can also convert them to state religion for religious power. So pops will not slowly promote to a higher class like in EU Rome, they will not slowly convert culture or religion, and you cannot convert the culture of a pop ever. This sparked some minor backlash and some questions from the community regarding naming conventions. For instance, a pleb was a Roman citizen, but they're grouped into freemen, not citizens. The other thing is that we're seeing these monarch points being used to do just something instantly. Want to convert religion? Spend religion power. I agree with some of the concern that is presented here. You'd expect that over time, maybe people assimilate culture or religion or whatever, but instead it requires the use of points to instantly change things with no stated cooldown. Now for me, I don't really like the sound of that, but I don't hate it either. I imagine they thought about it both ways and feel that this is just a better solution. A lot of people call this streamlining, but I don't think it is streamlining, as actively requiring you to do something, i.e. converting the religion, is harder to do than just passively letting it happen. So it's just a choice that's been made design-wise, and we'll just have to see how it's played out. Diary number 6, economy and buildings. Economic income is provided through tax and commerce. Tax income is primarily based on the slave pops you have and a few modifiers that affect it, like trade, stability, ministers, and political factions. Now, I've seen some people asking how slaves would ever pay taxes. I think generally this is just a representation of the person owning the slave paying the taxes for the work done, so it makes sense to me. Commerce is present only if you import or export trade goods from a province, and again, seemingly stating that the province must be totally controlled by one nation, not split between many. Each trade link provides some income, then citizens and marketplaces can increase it, as well as economic policies. Buildings are pretty simple. Each city can have at least one building, and for every 10 pops, they get another building level to build another. Buildings never upgrade, but multiple of the same type can be built. It seems as though there are only 4 buildings. Training camps for producing manpower and experience to units, fortresses for increasing your fort level, marketplaces for increasing your commerce, and granary to reduce unrest and increase your growth. You can actually see in the screenshot how they are baked into the province panel. It looks almost like a skill tree, and you're just increasing one of 4 levels at a time. Honestly, this seems extremely simple to me, so I was hoping for a little bit more depth. Again, we'll need to see how it plays out. Maybe on a large scale, less is more in terms of concentrating what you want provinces to be good at, but it seems like you just can't really have very unique provinces with niche specialities. It seems that you'll basically stack the same buildings on top of each other to get more and more effects, and specialize market provinces, military, defense, and pop growth, and that's basically it. Diary number 7, characters. Characters have 4 stats: martial for military things, finesse for technology and governorships, charisma for diplomatic things, and zeal for religious things. These, as you may notice, mimic the mana type resources up the top: military, civic, oratory, and religious. Only your leader actually affects those though, but with politics you can see and influence who will be the next leader. Now, characters will have their own traits that can be gained or lost. Personality, military, health, and status are the different categories that fit the traits. Health, for instance, could be the trait stressed or maimed, and typically they're quite negative. These traits open up particular events. These can cause different options and other traits and outcomes. Now, characters also have their own personal wealth and 4 primary stats. Popularity for kind of how others see the character and the likeliness of being elected. Loyalty, which is kind of self-explanatory. Prominence, which represents the fame of the character. And corruption. Now, we're not told too much about how those things work. Characters will have parents, they can get married and have children, as well as have friends and rivals. These characters seem like they are really the backbone of the game, as they'll be the ones leading the armies, handling research, diplomacy, government roles, and so on. Then they can also belong to political factions and influence or be influenced to do certain things. There's also been significant work put into the generation of characters based on ethnicity and age, so it's clearly a big focus here. Now, in EU Rome, there's a similar focus on characters, but I found that they can be largely ignored, to some degree, and the UI makes them super hard to keep track of because of their separate family trees, and each with their own rivals, but that is a game from 10 years ago. I'm hoping with updated UI, and a clearer picture can be painted of how people relate to each other both biologically and politically. And that is basically all the information we know so far about Imperator Rome. As I mentioned, each month I'll do a recap of the last 4 dev diaries. This one was a bit longer because there were 7 to cover. Generally speaking, there's some stuff I'm really interested in, such as the characters and the map, but some stuff I'm kind of on the fence about, such as the resources and the buildings. Modability seems to be a big focus though, so I'm sure things can be tailored for everyone's playstyle, and the best ones will always rise to the top. Let me know what you think of the features in the comments below, and if you like this type of recap video, I'll do it for more games, but there's just not that many I'm interested in right now. Leave a like if you liked the video and you want me to continue with this type of series. Thank you very much to the patrons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.